and welcome to A Victorious Life and Outreach Teachings Ministry of the Shallow Holiness Church, located at 2419 North Glass Street in the beautiful city of Roses, Tyler, Texas. We are excited about being able to broadcast to you by way of television, by way of YouTube, by way of, I guess YouTube is technically the internet, so if I say the internet, it all kind of clumps in. Okay, clumps into one. That voice you just heard was not the voice of God. That was the voice of the cameraman, longtime friends. And incidentally, the other day I found my, well, it was never lost. I just chose to take it out. And this is going to tie in with the new year, my plug for, you know, being better and progressing in life. I pulled out my senior memory book. And I don't know if they still do those or not, but we happen to have been able to go through high school during the times when it was still pretty much nostalgic, where you still had game day ribbons. They were 50 cents at John Tyler High School, and you would literally pin your ribbon on. You remember that? You'd pin your ribbon like when we played Nacogdoches, Drown the Dragons, or we played Longview, Lasso the Lobo, or what have you. And I was going through there, and because I was a member of the yearbook and the newspaper, we could always make double. We had a dark room, so we could make double prints. And I came across, Mr. Cameraman, a basketball picture for the John Tyler High School varsity basketball team when Coach Lawson, lo and behold, who's sitting on the front just like this? The cameraman. And my children, I was showing them, after I looked through it and read through some things, I took it to, all three of our kids were at home, and I showed them, they were looking through it, and I said, and my son's friend, she was there, and I said, hey, do you remember the cameraman? I said, that's him right there. And she was like, no way. So so I thought that was hilarious, and they got a kick out. I just left them with it, and they returned it, and my husband was saying, hey, can I take a look at that? I'm like, no, we're just gonna put that back into the vault. And the reason I brought that up is because the cameraman and I, prior to the show, we were talking about the remixing. So we have the cameraman, FYI, the cameraman is, since he's remixing himself and morphing, you know, or reinventing himself in 2016, this may be taping, it may not be. He may put the title down there that I choose, or he may not. He may put the self-interpretive scriptures down there, But saying all that to say this, I read through a lot of those comments, like it said at the very end, where do you plan on being the next 5 years, the next 10 years? And where I initially planned and what I initially planned for myself, as I said to my children, totally different. I read the descriptions for what I wrote and where I thought I would be. And if I would have had my way, and if there were no math involved, I would have been an OBGYN with my own indigent clinic, and happily married with 3 boys. And I had their little names down there, and it said being happily married with 3 boys, and being the best wife and mother that I can possibly be. And while that sounded, you know, when I got ready to put it up, I read through that again. And while it sounded like a good plan, I looked at that, and there was nothing about Christ in there, period, throughout the whole book. There was nothing from my end. You know, granted, I was 17 when I graduated, but to have been raised in a Christian home, there was nothing, no plans written with Christ in my life, and that was a teachable moment not just to me as an individual, but it was also a teachable moment for me to share with my children. Because they're still at a young age. You know, we do have one that has graduated from high school, but we have the two younger ones. So technically, I did end up with 3 kids. Almost, yeah, 2 boys and a girl. So hey, we can shut it down. I'm successful. You know, but we have been challenging this year, and that's funny the cameraman said about remixing, reinventing oneself, because we've been talking about progressing in life, and let this be the year. You know, and I shared this on Facebook. There was I watched a little boy riding his bike from outside of our home a few weeks ago, and he had a bike, and he had definitely mastered that little bike. He was, because I'd seen him ride it, a couple times, and his brother, it was right after Christmas, and his brother had a 10-speed fancy bike, and his brother was playing basketball, and he tried to get his brother's bike. He was trying to get on it, and it was obvious it was too big for him, but it didn't stop him from trying to get on the bike. He was, you know, when you're on a large bike and you can't sit on the seat, so we've all done it. You just pedal, and basically you give up sitting, or you just rest on your knees. Well, he couldn't get it. They call that a kickoff. He couldn't get that wind to where you start on your own and then build up the momentum. He was struggling trying to even get on the bike, and his brother came and helped him the one time, and he went a little piece, and he couldn't build up any momentum. So I was watching him, and he would call his brother, Gab, or hey, and his brother would stop basketball to run over there. And finally, the brother said to him, I heard him, he said, "Get your own bike. Leave my bike alone. Go ride your own bike." And the little boy, the brother literally had to, that third time, he just took his bike and put it down, and he said, "Go get on your own bike." So the little boy hopped, no big deal. He hops on his bike, and he's just whizzing. I mean, he's popping wheelies, and he's making the back. You know how we did that stuff as kids? Well, I really wasn't trying to do that because I was a girly girl. But he's turning it and moving it, and that was something. It was simple, but that was really profound to me in the fact that little boy, he had mastered his bike, but he was preparing for something bigger and better, because sooner or later, given the age of the older brother, he would not have continued to want that bike, because I think kids now, they reach a point where they get tired of things rather quickly. So, and that's what came to me. He was preparing for something bigger and something better, because he had already mastered the area, or the bike that the equipment that he was using. So I said all that to say this: in 2016, it's okay if you've mastered some things. It's okay if it's time for you to move on. It's okay for you to aspire and go after bigger and better things. We're born with that innate behavior to aspire, to have bigger, to have better, not greed, not envy, not covetousness, but we're born, that's our nature, to go after bigger things, to incorporate better things into our lives, not just again seeking after bigger barns and bigger houses and all that, not just that. But if that's what you want in 2016, make a plan to get that. If you feel that you're discontented and you're not satisfied with where you are in any aspect of your life, spiritual, mental, physical, emotional, or financial, there is no written rule that says you cannot better yourself. There's no written rule for that. So here at Victorious Life, that just the program itself, the naming of it is there's a story behind that. But 1 Corinthians 15:57 says, "But thanks be to God which gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus." So we are victorious when we have Christ in our life, and we've accepted him as our Savior, as our Lord. That means he is our sovereign leader. He's going to lead us and direct us and guide us and give us all the things that we need in order for our lives to fulfill the scripture that he said in John 10:10, the thief cometh not but for to steal, to kill, and to destroy. But I am come that you might have life and that you have it more abundantly. So it is his goal, it is his mission, it is his plan for our lives that we live our lives abundantly. Struggle, you take in struggle. There comes a point where you get tired of struggling. There comes a point where, I don't have anything against subsidized monies, I don't have a problem with welfare. I don't have a problem with WIC and all the disability and all of those things. I believe if you need them, take advantage of them, but don't abuse them. I don't believe there should be, I don't think the system was designed for generations of people to be raised on welfare. Now when I went to college, I had met people who, when we, you sit around in the commons areas and you do people still say capping or cracking jokes on people? Not too much. Now what they say, blast or what have you.
Shade now.
Shade, okay.
Shade.
Well, I'm glad the Lord let me live during the time I was, because I'm very sarcastic. I would be shade ridden, but I thought it was humorous, okay? But we would sit around and we would talk about, how, stuff from home, because when you go away to college, you thinking you're an adult when you're just a kid living in a different location. But people would talk about government cheese and the food stamp books and all that. Well, by the grace, mercy, and power of God, I never experienced that. Now, I did eat some government cheese because back in the day, they would bring to the church what they called, to preachers, pounds. I don't know if they still call it pounds. And there were people that would bring like big blocks of that government cheese, best grilled cheese sandwiches ever. Although it was processed cheese, best ever. And sometimes you cut the cheese and be real.
But it took a while to melt.
Yeah.
You
had to cut it just right. And the only person, whenever we got that cheese, the only person in our family who could make a mean grilled cheese was my little sister. And that's because she was fat when she was growing up. But I would try to cut the cheese, and it would be thick on one end and a sliver, and like you said, bread be just crispy black, burnt, trying to get the cheese to melt. So my point is, I as an adult, I would think about those stories, and this one guy in particular, he had all like the low income welfare, tongue talking shoes, shoestrings tied together for belts, even in high school. And that was mesmerizing. Well, lo and behold, that individual is now a federal attorney for, the Department of Education right outside of Dallas. Very good friend of mine. And that started me to thinking, and we talked about that, both being professionals. It's like, you don't really, think if he would have fallen victim to the mentality of his surroundings. So he took the initiative to get out of that situation, and that's what we're saying, that use 2016. You may not be able to jump the hurdle, but at least put your name down to get in the race. You may not be able to. Again, you may not be able to go to the starting lineup, but get your name on the roster saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Start planning, break your year down, and I'll be up front with you. And I know some pastors and preachers and teachers, they don't like when people who are in leadership positions talk this way, but we got to keep it real. I'm not really where I want to be. There are some things spiritually. Now, I'm not in a backslidden state. Now, let's not trip on that part, okay? I'm good, okay? But there are some things spiritually that I want to do for the Lord. I really do. That I want to go, back to radio and and do all these other amazing things for the Lord. And you know what? I could sit around and talk about it all day. But at the end of the day, what I have to do is count up the cost, meaning I've got to be the person to take time to go seek the Lord and ask him what radio station, you know, who do you want me to reach? You know, is this, if this is something you would have for us to do, where's the money going to come from? You know, so those are things that I want to do spiritually. In my own natural life, there are a whole lot of things. I still want to go to Europe. I'm going to Europe. I want to take my child. Our daughter says she wants to see the Great Wall of China. Well, you know what? You're going to see that Great Wall of China on my watch. I'm going to take you there. You know, but I can sit here and say that all day. But if I don't count up the cost, if I don't say, okay, you know what? If taking her to see the Great Wall of China, if I want to take her by the time she's in the 9th grade, I need to put back $20 a month or $20 a week. That responsibility rests with me. If I say I want a better, or if you say you're sitting out there and you're living in subsidized housing, again, I'm not speaking against subsidized housing, but if you look around and you say, well, my mama lived in a subsidized housing, my grandma lived in a subsidized, my auntie lived around the corner, my uncle lived in a, that's when you should start saying, wait a minute, how do I get out of this situation? Especially if you have children, you should, you know, count up the cost for that now, because in 2016, we want you in the race. Okay, so let's just start with number one. The Bible said the race is not given to the swift or to the strong, but to the one that endureth. So we just want you to finish, okay? We want you to get in the race. We don't want you to worry about being the fastest runner. If you're at the end, we just want you to endure to the end. Finish what you start. Get in there and start it and finish it. And the best way to do that is to start by planning. Get your name on the list or on the roster of life to run. Okay, because we're raising a generation of kids who are becoming very complacent and very passive, and they're not understanding you have a choice. You don't have to choose to be poor. You don't have to choose to be ignorant. You don't have to be, you don't have to be poor. You don't have to be ignorant. You don't have to be the tail end of nothing. If you are ignorant, if you are poor, you're the tail end, it's because that's what you have chosen. It's not because, God forbid, the white man got me down, the Mexican man got me down, the Native American is on me, the Italians or Palestinians or whoever. At the end of the day, if Christ is in your life, he is victorious. He is a winner. He purposefully goes after and seeks after people who have aggressive personalities. That means you're going to be successful in life. So saying all that, I guess we should get to the word, because I would be going on and on. That's a word right there.
For me.
That's a word right there. We sit around and we talk about, and incidentally, it makes sense now, because have been discussing the book of Genesis. But look at what verse number 2 says. It says, and the earth was without form and void. That means it was empty. It was missing something. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. This is the most powerful verse in the Bible. And it's not in red. It's just, you're hearing the story. In verse number 2, the end part, the second half of that sentence says, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And what he did next, he said, let there be light. Look what God did. God basically did an assessment. It was empty. It was void. There was nothing. So his spirit is moved. His spirit literally goes to see what's going on, what he's going to do. He assessed what needed to be done. And look at what he did. It was dark. So he said, let there be light. So he could see what needed to be done. And that ties into what we're saying. You don't have to figure out what you need to do. You don't have to figure out, how do I go about doing this? If you have Christ in your life, if you have accepted the Lord Jesus Christ as your Savior, the only thing you really need to do to get your life started is to humble yourself and say, look, Lord, I don't know what to do. I need some help. Instruct me, guide me. What do I do first? Because He's going to do the right thing the first time. And look at what he did. If the first thing he did was to say, let there be light, that means he will reveal to you what you need to work on, what you need to do for your life. You know, I've always been this type of person, and I guess I was raised in this type of home where just because it worked like that for that next person doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen for you that way. Now, it's safe to say everybody that you know, my father was college educated. My mother was not. She was one of the only people in her family. Well, she was the only person in a family of 6 kids that got a high school diploma. Now, there were like 2 of them that went and eventually got GEDs, but she was like, I didn't want a GED. I wanted a high school diploma. Now, she failed a couple of times, and she did not try to keep that a secret. But the way my mother carried herself and the way her demeanor, a lot of people always thought for years my mother was a teacher. And when they would say, oh, you're a teacher, and snooty people would come around her acting snooty, thinking that she had gone to like Prairie View or TSU or Southern or something. And they would say, so what do you do? She said, I'm a housewife. I stay home. They said, where'd you go to college? I did not. Because, you know, that's not something she wanted to do. During her time, she knew what she wanted to do. So she was a successful housewife and mother, and she was the best. She was a very good housewife. She was a stay-at-home mom extraordinaire. I did not learn how to do laundry until I went to the University of Houston. I didn't learn how to cook a meal until I was living in an apartment after college in Dallas, Texas, off of Central Expressway, and didn't know you had to turn the vent on a vent hood. I did not know that if you left noodles, macaroni in cold water on the stove for too long, it will turn to flour. Who knew that was made out of? Anyway, let me stop chasing that rabbit. But my point is, get in the race this year. Get in the race. And I keep hearing that. Get in the race this year. And as always, we want to invite you. This is our we started the Tuesday Bible study. It is going well. There are still some spaces. So if you want to come out and study, we're starting at the book of Genesis, and all notes are free, all seats are free. And on last week, this was the homework. There were 20 questions. Here's one of the questions that I think every Christian should be asked. It says, using the list below as a guide, write your personal belief system in the space below as to what you wholeheartedly believe and accept as your spiritual truth. And we talked about very quickly on last week: sovereign election, salvation, justification by faith, the Palestinian covenant, priesthoods, Aaronic and Melchizedek, death, resurrection, rapture of the church. Because you got a lot of people running around here believing in a bunch of this okey-doke brouhaha that is unbiblical, unscriptural. You know, I came across some individuals that told me they believe we're in the tribulation right now, and I just kind of said, okay, you know what, well, okay, I'm not going to take the mark, sister. That's one reason why I don't even have a debit card. And you pulled out a big old check. And I was like, okay, well, all right, but let me move around from that, because then I'll be talking and then people know who I'm talking about. But anyway, I know, cameraman.
That's all right.
Yeah, I know. So we want to invite you out to that. It's Tuesday, 6 to 7 at the Lighthouse, 411 West Front, about the book of Genesis. Now, we have been talking about how the Bible is an integrated message system, and what's important for us to know about, if you're starting your year off in the first book, then you need to understand the central theme of the book. And the central theme, not necessarily of the book, let's just look at the Bible. Central theme of the Old Testament is a nation. The central theme of the New Testament is about a man. But if I said to you that the primary theme of the entire Bible is Jesus Christ as man's redemption, I'm sure some of you would probably change the channel. So you might want to change the channel, because that's what the Bible is about. The Bible it entails a lot, like we said from last week, a lot of different themes and characters and storylines that are interwoven, and they talk about redemption. That's all it talks about is redemption. And what's interesting to me is, and I hope I won't offend anybody when I say this, but Genesis is the first book of the Bible. Okay, we understand that it means beginnings. Okay, now sometimes when we go to you go to church, you hear a lot of pastors will quote like in the Greek it says, in the Hebrew it says, and I'm not here to speak against that. I'm just here to say, sometimes it's unnecessary because we speak English. So I want to explain to you that the Torah is the Hebrew term. Okay, the Torah basically refers to the first 5 books of the Bible. So you've got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. In the Hebrew, whenever you hear a preacher or a teacher say the Hebrew Torah, it's not talking about the entire Bible. It's only talking about those first 5 books. Now, in the Greek language, it's referred to as Pentateuch. So those are still just the first 5 books of the Bible. So don't allow yourself to get sidetracked by hearing a bunch of words that you consider, fancy or new. I'm not taking away from the wording, but understand whenever you hear Torah or Pentateuch, it's only talking about those first 5 books. So when you think about Genesis in relationship to those to the first 5 books of the Torah, the Pentateuch, or the Bible, the English word being the Bible, then you understand there's something amazing and thought-provoking about that particular book, because it's going to set the standard for all of the other things that take place even after the first 5 books, but it sets the standards for all of the Bible. So when we look at the book of Genesis, we look and have to understand that within the 50 chapters of the book of Genesis, there are divisions within those 50 chapters. Okay, well, within the book itself, there's a division that occurs. Now, if you're just going to sit down and start trying to study the book of Genesis, what you're going to notice, there are patterns. Okay, there are patterns, and what I thought was interesting about that is it has been credited, of course, for Moses has been credited with writing the book, and I'm not here to say he didn't write it. There are theories that are developing and have developed over time that says, well, you really don't know who the writer was, but we are going to, we're going to give credit to Moses as its primary author. Now, when you look at the book of Genesis, you have, of course, 50 chapters. Now, I read the KJV Bible, and we've talked about, my reasoning for doing that, and then we talked about different translations. But so within book of Genesis, you've got 50 chapters. Now, I personally like to show you, for those of you that are following along, and I don't know if it's possible for the cameraman to put this at the bottom of the screen, but you have a division occurs in at chapter 11, okay? Because from chapters 1 through 10, you have or actually 1 through 11, you have what we consider, or you should consider, as prehistory. Prehistory talks about events, mainly, again, just mainly events and different little, a few minor individuals. Okay, it talks about, some things that took place. So that's what happens between chapters 1 through 11. You have prehistory, and all it's talking about are the events. But when you get from chapters 12 all the way to chapter 50, you then learn about what we consider or have been what individuals have referenced as the patriarchs, meaning Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and even and Joseph, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So you have prehistory that talks about events, chapters 1 through 11, and then you have chapters 12 through 50 that talk about individuals. Okay, and we're using the term patriarchs because this family line becomes established per se in chapters 12 through 50 from a spiritual standpoint, as a people, as a nation. So remember when we said to you that the Old Testament is a book about a nation and the New Testament is a book about an individual, that individual being Jesus Christ, but the overall Bible itself is really about Jesus. Jesus Christ is in every story, every storyline from Genesis to Revelation. Now, let's take a look at what I've said to you. If we're saying that the first parts are prehistory, then we have chapters 1 and 2 in my Bible. The headline for those chapters, of course, is creation. And you have the Garden of Eden, and you have man being created. They're going into that, man being created, and Adam naming the animals and the making of the woman. So everything that God created or made occurs in those first 2 chapters of Genesis. Now, what's interesting, in your personal studies, what I want you to pay close attention to are the days, those different events, the things that he made and created on those particular days. Because what you'll see in those first 2 chapters, the things that he's making on those assigned days, like the first day, third day, second day, 6th day, 5th day, 4th day, on those days, what God is really doing is creating systems. He's setting order. And it goes back to what we said about at the beginning of the broadcast. You have to have order to your life. Your life has to run by a system, either a system that you are developing or a system that someone else has put into place. The goal is for you to be successful. Now, one of the systems, to give you an example, one of the systems set forth in our home growing up was you will get a high school diploma, you will go to college. If you don't go to college, you will go to the military. If you don't go to the military, you will learn a trade or you will get a job that has the potential for you to have longevity and growth in those things on the job. So really, you had 3 choices. But you automatically knew you would get a high school diploma. There was no fussing about that. Okay. Now, that system served all of us well. All 6 of us got a high school diploma. Why? Because that system was put in place and established in my parents' homes. Okay. Now, my mother, her home was a different story. I ain't tripping on that, but we got to keep it real. But my mother, because because there was no system, no educational system in place in her home, what did she do? She developed her own. Am I making sense? She developed her own system. She said, if I want to be successful, I need a high school diploma. Didn't look to say, hey, it's not working for that person. No, she got a high school diploma. So then my father's family, not only would you have a high school diploma, but you had to be either number 1 or number 2 coming out of high school. So if he was number 1 for high school, then they took it a step farther. You will go to college. So all 6 of them, numbers 1 or 2, went to college, graduated. So that was that. Those 2 people got married. What is their system? Their joint system now is for our children, high school diploma, college education. So and I'm trying to make this as simple as possible using, our family as a guide. So here you are, you got 6 kids that graduated from high school. All 6 kids had the opportunity to go to college. Did all 6 of them graduate from college? No. One decided, I want to go to the military after you'd gone to college. One decided, I don't want to go to college. I want to make money. I want to go learn a trade. So pay me the money so I can go learn a trade. Either or, systems were in place. Why? Because everybody sat back and realized, those parents realized, if I want our children to be successful, this is what we need to require. Well, what has happened to us? Now, you fast forward with us, a high school diploma, that's not an option. That's a given. Okay, because times are different. College education, that's not an option. That's a given, unless you join the military or you have entrepreneurial spirit to where you have a knack for creating your own thing. And I don't have a problem with that. So, but that's a system in our home. So look at what he's done. On those days that he was creating, God was creating and making things in chapters 1 and 2, he was setting order by creating systems. And that's what happens in our lives. We have to realize we got to create order. We got to have some type of system. Then in chapter 3, you have the fall of man. Notice it didn't say the fall of man and woman. It says the fall of man. So when you understand, no disrespect to man as a our males, or not here to do that, because both of us need each other. But in chapter 3, it was based on the actions of the man. Okay, so when you get there, you see how God has set up order. He set up, system. And so he's a God of order, time, and design being systems. So he set up order. He set up the design of it per se. There was no reason for time to get involved because there was no sin. But when you see in chapter 3, the fall of man, it then ushers in a penalty or a consequence for going against God's order and his design. So now you have him being a God of order, time, and design. There's a reversal that takes place. So you see how in chapter 3, man, the fall of man, now creates disorder and chaos. It breaks down what God had just created in chapters 1 and 2. When you get to chapter 4, you have family relationships. You have children are now introduced. You have Cain and Abel. Not only were Cain and Abel introduced, and remember on last week we talked about how the Bible is an integrated message system, and even the week before how it interlocks the characters and themes, overlap and all those things. Well, look at what is happening. If we're just looking at giving you a contextual outline of the book of Genesis, you've got chapters 1 and 2, creation, orders, and systems. You've got chapter 3, sin enters. Now you've got chapter 4 with Cain and Abel. Look at what has happened. You have family relationships because there are two. Now there's a family because you've got, kids involved. But let's just look at what's taking place now. Not only because sin was introduced in chapter 3, sin is slowly starting to increase. Now you've got, because of sin being introduced in chapter 3, you've got jealousy. You've got envy, you've got anger, you've got bitterness, you got murder, you got bedlam, you got confusion. So you see how even though chapter 4 introduces the family unit, it also introduces, you can see how sin is slowly, the negatives or the consequences of sin is slowly starting to get bigger. Okay, then you've got in chapter 5 the genealogy of Noah, meaning after Cain and Abel, they did have another son. They had Seth, or after Cain slew Abel, they did have another son, named Seth. And you see how man's numbers have increased, and you are introduced to a man by the name of Noah by way of his genealogy or his family line. And that's basically what all of chapter 5 does. It just reestablishes that, hey, man was successful in reproducing and multiplying. He did obey God's command by being fruitful and multiplying and increasing from a natural standpoint. But you know what else was happening that man didn't realize? He was also being fruitful and multiplying and increasing by way of his now sinful nature. So that's what happens in the genealogy in chapter 5, genealogy of Moses. Of Noah, excuse me. You have chapters 6 through 9 where sin has reached a peak or reached a level to where it now needs to be dealt with. So that's where you have the flood. Actually, we forgot chapters 6 through 9, the flood of Noah. But what I want you to really focus on is in chapter 7, in those between 6 and 9, okay, we know 7's in there. In chapter 7, you see where God sees Noah, okay? And verse number 1 says, "And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation." So you see how in chapter 7, Noah has done what? He has really lived his life like day one. He has followed the order of God. He has followed the time of God, the design of God, meaning he has lived his life and continued to live his life the way he has been instructed, the way man should have lived his life at the beginning. He has been in perfect harmony per se, or unison, and all those things. He has continued to live his life in a godly and righteous way, although bedlam and mayhem has been around him. So when you get to chapter 7 in verse number 1, and God instructs the writer and tells the writer about this story of Noah, and he says to Noah, "I've seen you're righteous in this generation." Then you hop to the New Testament and you read about, in 1 Timothy, hey, in the last days, perilous times will come. You're able to see a lot of those characteristics and biblical things that happen, and spiritual mentalities that we see now that will continue to escalate. You read about them in Genesis. Okay, you read about them in Genesis. So that's why we say, in the beginning was the end. If you get a good command of the book of Genesis, then you'll be able to understand the significance of the things that happen from that point on, because every detail is linked to every other detail when it comes to the Bible. And since the Bible is an integrated message system, then you should understand and will be able to understand how it all makes sense. Then you get to chapters 10 and 11 where you have the Tower of Babel. And this was always interesting to me because you had man destroyed, man made, man destroyed in chapter 6 through 9. Flood kills them all, drowns them, babies, kids, adults, old people. It ends it. But then you get to chapters 10 and 11, and what should have been man has learned his lesson, man wants to live. You got the Tower of Babel. Man is now doing his own thing yet again. So that lets you know that, again, building upon the chapter prior and the storylines prior, when you get to chapters 10 and 11, you understand that evidently, although the promise was riding safely in the confines of the ark, that promise being Noah and his family, and that ark representing to a certain extent a prototype for the Ark of the Covenant, because in the way that it was constructed, it was safely inside of the compartment was the promise of salvation, and which is safety to Noah and his family. They were enclosed. No harm came around them. They were protected on all sides. But you know what else? The tragedy is, from a spiritual standpoint, the rudiment of sin and that essence of a sinful nature was also being spared. So it was just a matter of time before they got off the ark. And we know Noah got drunk, had a vineyard, and decided he was going to make him some boon for him, some Southern Comfort, some Ciroc, whatever. And before you know it, Noah up there in his tent, got his clothes off. He's just having a good old time. And look what happens. See, I'm not making this up, y'all. It's all Noah's in there. We say he's just, I've been at the game so long, Mr. Cameron, I don't know what dances. I'll start doing the prep or what have you.
No, you don't want to do that.
But no, okay, I'm going to do it just because he said. And Lois Minor taught me how to do the prep when I was in the 11th grade. So shout out to Lois. Totally changed my college career. But he's in there and he's just drunk, just sloppy drunk. Not just, he's like just a toe down sloppy drunk. And when the youngest son sees him, and he's naked, the youngest son sees him, and he goes and tells his older brothers, and they back in with the sheet because they are covering and not looking on their father's nakedness. Look at what Noah does to the son. Noah then puts a curse on the grandson, the son of Ham. He curses Ham's line. That's sinful. You had no reason to be sloppy drunk. Evidently, that child had never seen you in that type of, he hadn't seen you in that type of environment. He was respectful of you. So I don't believe Ham went to go tell his brothers as in making fun. I think it was behavior that was out of character. So when he informed his brothers, they were old enough to understand, wait a minute, that's still our father. So instead of the father being Noah, instead of him saying, you know what, son, let me tell you, I'm sorry. I put you in a situation where you didn't need to. I should have had my tent locked or what have you. He gets angry and he places a verbal curse or places some type of verbal curse on this grandson that has yet to be born. So what does that say? That lets you know that sin, if man had increased, so too had sin. Because when you get to chapters 10 and 11, lo and behold, Tower of Babel. So you see how it has increased. Well, you know what? We are all out of time. We are not all out of time. He's saying stretch it out, and we can do that because we love to teach. But again, going back to, and I'm glad I'm not out of time because I kind of like that. The Tower of Babel, it should not be a shock to you because look at what has happened. If we go back to chapter 4, like I remember I showed you how sin increased. You had murder, bedlam, bitterness, anger, frustration, and all that. Then you had Noah come along, righteous, and we said that the rudiment of sin was being spared as well as natural life and physical life. Well, after the flood, when you enter into chapter 10 and 11 with the Tower of Babel, look at what it says in verse number 6, Genesis chapter 11, verse 6. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them which they have imagined to do. So you understand that they were uniformed, not in godly practices, but they were uniformed in things of a sinful nature. Sadly, we see that our country and the entire world has become unified. The internet, whether we believe it or not, it is one language. Internet is spoken around the world. If you have a mouse, if you have a laptop, an iPad, if you even have a cell phone, not a flip phone, but you have a rudimentary cell phone, you can communicate with people and places you may never go. You can send an email you can send an email and click on a company, send an email to an individual that's on the backside of China. And if their government has no restrictions on it, they can respond to you within a matter of seconds. There's a company out of England that I love to order clothes from. I can sit there and I don't need to call them. I can sit there and send emails, or if I want to call them because I have a cell phone, there's no long distance charge. I just sit there and dial the number, and on the other end, the lady will say, hello, cheerio, stuff like that. It's like, well, yeah, we'll ring you. I'll ring you when you're order. And it's like, you're unified. You're unified. The world has become unified in progressing. But more importantly, the world is unified in its singular motive to increase sinful mentalities and sinful behaviors. And we see that taking place. Well, on next week, now we are out of time, but on next week we're going to take a look at at the orientation of the Bible, the patriarchs, which is part 2 of the Bible, of Genesis, So we're going to start taking a look at chapters 12 through 50. And as we always say, if you have Christ, you're already a winner. If you have the Spirit of the living God, you can face any challenge life throws your way. Remember to check us out at our web address. Any video, we now have a video gallery. So once the videos are uploaded, they automatically go to the video gallery. But if you just want to pull up YouTube, pull us up on YouTube, hit us up on Facebook, prayer request. If you want the online newsletter is there. And you know what? With that, you can live a victorious life. God bless you.